Something's gone wrong inside Russia's war machine, and it's changing everything. That may be a strange thing to say, given that Russian President Vladimir Putin has begun a renewed spring offensive targeting regions such as Sumy. However, that offensive hides something that Russia doesn't want the world to know. It can't win in Ukraine. Why? Russia's armor has disappeared. Its tanks, which it needs to conduct, its furious ground assaults, are disappearing, with those that remain being rendered useless. Artillery is at an all-time low, and Russia now finds itself in a position where it can't do the things it needs to do to win in Ukraine. That's what military correspondents Jonathan Lowe and David Axe revealed in pieces for the Lowdown blog and Newsweek, respectively. In the Lowdown, Lowe highlights what Russia needs to do to win the war in Ukraine. It's remarkably simple. Russia must gain more territory than it currently occupies to place enough pressure on Ukraine to force it into capitulation. Much more. Right now, Russia controls around 20% of Ukraine. That alone represents a tiny gain over more than 3 years of warfare. After Ukraine pushed back Putin's initial February 2022 invasion, Russia's forces managed to consolidate and occupy around 18% of Ukraine's territory. Since then, a tiny 2% gain is all Putin's forces have to show for a war of attrition that has cost its military over 935,000 of its people, along with more than 600 tanks and 22,000 armored fighting vehicles. Remember those points. They'll be important later. Russia's win condition is to at the very minimum claim all of Luhansk, and Donetsk, according to Axe. They're the largest oblasts eastern Ukraine has, says Axe. They're still the focus of the majority of Putin's assaults. But therein lies the problem for Putin. Advances in both regions have slowed to a crawl, and Russia still needs to occupy tens of miles of territory across both to even lay a claim to full control over the oblasts. Of course, Putin has a strategy for making those advances. It's the same strategy he's had since the beginning of the war: overwhelm Ukraine with massive numbers. That's why he's poured more than 500,000 Russian and North Korean soldiers into Ukraine, alongside the thousands he's contracted from other countries. They're supposed to be the overwhelming force, an army so large that Ukraine's defenses crumble under constant human wave attacks. Those human waves aren't enough. If Russia is to advance the many miles per day it needs to advance to take Luhansk and Donetsk, the strategy it needs to follow is simple, according to Axe. Russia launches attacks at the lightly defended rear of Ukraine's front line. Such attacks require protected mobility, meaning they're reinforced by armored vehicles, tanks, and other mechanized units. The more of these armored units Russia can bring to assaults on Ukraine's rear, the more damaging those assaults can be. Once a breakthrough is made via the protected units, Putin then relies on his superior manpower numbers to overwhelm a Ukrainian position. But there's a problem with this strategy. It's worked for the last 3 years because Putin was able to maintain his military's protected mobility. Granted, he had to do it by pulling ancient Soviet-era tanks, vehicles, and howitzers out of storage. But even those older units still offered some protection to his ground forces. Now, according to Loenax, that mechanized mobility has disappeared. Putin's rampaging assaults across multiple areas of Ukraine have resulted in a cavalcade of issues that make it impossible for Russia to win in Ukraine, and certainly not within the achievable deadlines for which the Kremlin calls. That leads us to a question. Why can't Russia win in Ukraine anymore? We'll start with its mechanized forces, specifically its tanks and armored vehicles. Simply put, Russia has run out of almost all of the Soviet-era stockpiles on which it's relied for the last 3 years, which has dramatically decreased the intensity of its attacks on Ukraine's rear. That's according to The Insider, which wrote in February that the latest estimates suggest that Russia is running out of military hardware. It quotes the open-source military tracker Oryx, which records all confirmed losses of military hardware in the Ukraine war. According to Oryx, Russia has lost over 20,000 units of its military hardware, compared to just 600 losses on Ukraine's side since February 2022. Among those losses are tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personal carriers, of which Russia has confirmed total losses of over 11,600. More than 2,600 of its tanks lie in ruins, along with 1,903 of its armored personnel carriers. Infantry fighting vehicles are the worst hit. 4,146 of them lay in ruins as of January 2025. And here's the most worrying thing for Putin. these are conservative numbers. Oryx only tracks 100% confirmed losses, meaning it will only record a loss if it finds video or photographic evidence of that loss. That's why its figures are so much smaller than those offered by Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, which we shared earlier. Ukraine puts the number at closer to 36, 503 times higher than what Oryx claims. Either way, these losses are devastating for Russia's attempts to achieve victory in Ukraine. And to make matters worse, Russia's ability to replenish its supplies is faltering. Take tanks as an example. If we assume Oryx's figures are correct, Russia is losing approximately 866 of its tanks annually. Its problem is that its manufacturing facilities are only capable of building an estimated 250 T-90 tanks per year, with the insider claiming that total new tank production is no more than 300. Putin has gotten around this problem in the past by restoring Soviet-era tanks, pulling from Russia's massive stockpiles to maintain his fierce ground offensives. Now, they're running out too. Newsweek reports that Russia only has enough tanks in its stockpiles to maintain its current pace of war until 2026. After that, it's done. In 2024 alone, Russia refurbished around 1,500 of its main battle tanks, along with 2,800 armored vehicles and infantry carriers. It still has several thousand each left in its stockpiles, but it now faces a problem it didn't have when Putin first started pulling from Russia's Soviet stockpiles. It's left with the dregs. There's a logic to this thinking. When Putin first started restoring older tanks, he chose those that had survived as best as possible after spending decades in storage. Those tanks were restored with parts from other, more diminished tanks that Russia had in storage, diminishing the stockpiles further. Now, the majority of those restored tanks lie in ruins on the Ukrainian battlefield, and Russia is left with the tanks that it chose not to restore initially. Those tanks are more run down. They'll take much longer to restore and may require parts from multiple destroyed tanks to get up and running again. So, you get an exponential decrease in the tank stock that Russia has available. Each replacement restored when Russia loses a tank is a little more decrepit and requires more time to make workable than the one that came before. The situation is the same for Russia's armored vehicles. For instance, Russia produces around 860 of its infantry fighting vehicles annually, about 460 BMP-3S and somewhere between 300 and 400 BTR-82S. The latter is a problem in its own right. Many of Russia's supposedly new BTR-82S are actually older vehicles that have been modernized so they are usable in Ukraine. Again, the numbers don't track, even when we use the more conservative Oryx numbers. Dividing 4,146 infantry fighting vehicle losses by 3 years gives US an annual churn rate of 1,385. Around 500 more vehicles lost per year than Russia is capable of producing. As Russia's stockpiles of these vehicles decrease, its rate of production will slow down even further. That slowdown is inevitable. Russia only has between 41% and 52% of its pre-war reserves remaining in storage. And again, these are the dregs. The vehicles it chose not to restore the first, second, or third time around because they're in such massive states of disrepair that it will take months to make them viable if they can be restored at all. If